You are going to die, and your brain knows exactly what to do about it. Not darkness, not silence, not a slow fading out like a television being switched off. What actually happens inside your brain in the final 10 minutes is so specific, so measurable, and so deeply strange that neuroscientists who study it struggle to explain what it means. For everything we thought we knew about consciousness, identity, and what you actually are. This is not a philosophical question. This is a biological one. If you asked most people what death feels like, they would describe absence, nothingness. One moment you are here, the next you are not. It is the most intuitive image imaginable, but that is not what the data shows. In 2023, researchers at the University of Michigan placed electrodes on the brains of patients dying of cardiac arrest. Brain activity did not slow down. It did not fade. It surged. Gamma waves fired at frequencies the researchers had never seen in living, healthy subjects. The dying brain was not shutting down. It was turning on. The process does not begin when the heart stops. It begins earlier. In the final 10 minutes, blood pressure begins to drop in a pattern surprisingly consistent across individuals. The brain, which consumes 20% of your body's oxygen despite being only 2% of your body weight, begins to receive less of what it needs. And here is where it gets strange. The brain does not respond to this the way a computer responds to a power failure, with random errors and corrupted data. It responds with a precise, ordered sequence of shutdowns. And the sequence reveals something extraordinary about the hierarchy of what your brain considers essential. The first systems to go are the ones you would expect least. This is the first thing neuroscientists found that nobody predicted. Abstract thought disappears first. Your ability to plan, to worry about the future, to calculate consequences, gone within the first 2 minutes of significant oxygen reduction. The prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the human brain, the part that makes you distinctly human, is the first to surrender. What remains after it goes is not chaos. It is something older. Emotion intensifies. Memory activates with a specificity that normal waking consciousness never produces. People who have been resuscitated from cardiac events report not a vague life flashing before their eyes, but something far more precise. Specific moments, specific faces, specific sensory details from decades earlier, experienced not as memories, but as presence. As now. The neuroscience explanation is that the hippocampus, freed from the regulatory suppression of the prefrontal cortex, begins firing without inhibition. Every memory it has ever encoded becomes simultaneously accessible in a way that is neurologically impossible during normal life. You do not remember your past in those minutes. You inhabit it, and then something else happens. Something that has no consensus explanation and has divided the neuroscience community for a decade. In 2013, the same University of Michigan team published a study that became one of the most debated papers in modern neuroscience. They were studying rats, specifically rats in cardiac arrest. What they found was that, at the precise moment of clinical death, a wave of coordinated electrical activity swept through the brain from back to front. They called it a wave of death. But that name turned out to be wrong in a way nobody expected. The wave was not disorganized. It was not random. It showed the signatures of conscious processing, the same neural correlates that, in living subjects, are associated with visual perception, self-awareness, and the integration of sensory experience into a unified sense of reality. The brain, at the moment of death, appeared to be generating an experience. What that experience is, whether it constitutes anything like consciousness, whether it is the biological mechanism behind near-death reports of light and presence and profound calm, is the question that has made this research simultaneously the most exciting and the most contested in neuroscience today. The honest answer is, we do not know. But the data forces us to ask a question that science has spent 2 centuries trying to avoid. Here is the part that the obituaries never mention. The 10 minutes do not end the same way for everyone, and the differences are not random. Researchers studying the neuroscience of dying have identified something they call the coherence window, a period, variable in length, but typically between 2 and 5 minutes, in which brain activity organizes itself into patterns of unusual complexity before the final decline. The length and intensity of this window appears to correlate with 2 factors: the lifetime density of meaningful experience, and the degree to which a person was conscious and present in the moments immediately preceding the event. In other words, the brain you die with is shaped by the life you lived inside it. People who spent decades in deep cognitive engagement, learning, creating, forming genuine human connections, show longer and more complex coherence windows in monitored dying events. People who experienced prolonged isolation, chronic stress, or what researchers neutrally describe as low autobiographical richness, show shorter ones. Your brain is not a fixed object that experiences your life. It is built by it, and in the final 10 minutes, it plays back exactly what you gave it. But here is what changes everything about how you should understand this. The research on the dying brain has produced one finding that nobody expected and nobody initially wanted to publish. In studies of monitored deaths, the moment of biological death, the cessation of measurable brain activity, is not a single event. It is a threshold that the brain crosses, and in many documented cases, recrosses multiple times. Patients resuscitated hours after clinical death have shown brain activity patterns consistent with the coherence window in recordings taken after resuscitation, suggesting that the final processing sequence had continued, or restarted, well beyond what any prior model of brain death would have predicted. The boundary between alive and dead, at the level of the brain, is not a line, it is a zone. And how wide that zone is, and what happens inside it, is a question that modern medicine is only beginning to have the technology to ask. What does this mean for you? Not as a philosophical abstraction, as a practical fact about the organ inside your skull right now. Your brain will at some point enter its final 10 minutes, and in those minutes, it will do something it has never done before in your entire life. It will have access to everything, every face, every moment, every version of yourself that ever existed. The prefrontal cortex that spends your waking hours worrying, planning, and editing your experience into something manageable will go silent. And what remains will be the oldest, deepest parts of what you are. The parts that process emotion, connection, and presence without filter. The question that the research forces on you is not about death. It is about now. If your brain plays back what you gave it, if the coherence window is built from the life that was lived inside it, then the 10 minutes at the end are not separate from the 10 minutes you are living right now. They are made of them. A researcher who has spent 15 years studying end-of-life neuroscience was asked in a 2022 interview whether studying death had changed how she lived. She paused for a long time before answering. She said, "The most consistent finding in this research is not about dying. It is about attention. The brain records everything you pay attention to, and in the end, it gives it all back. The final 10 minutes of your brain are not a conclusion. They are a reflection. The only question is what you are giving it to reflect."